I never thought my life would take the kind of turn that would make me write something like this. My name is Maya, and when I look back 4 years ago, I realized that I was just as lost as the man I once helped on the street. At that time, my life was far from glamorous. People always think that someone who helps others must already be in a stable position. But that was not my case at all. I was 24, broke, exhausted, and living in a cramped apartment with peeling walls and neighbors who fought every night. I worked at a small bakery downtown, waking up at 4 a.m. every single day, mixing dough, cleaning counters, and selling pastries to people who barely noticed I was alive. My boss was always yelling, customers were always rushing, and I often ended the day with sore feet and empty pockets. Even though I had a job, the pay barely covered rent and groceries. I used to sit by the tiny window in my apartment at night, eating instant noodles, wondering if this was all life had in store for me. My friends from college had moved on to better things, corporate jobs, travel, even marriages, while I was stuck in a cycle that felt impossible to break. One rainy evening, I was walking home from work. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the streets were shiny with water. That was when I saw him, a man sitting on the sidewalk, his clothes drenched, his hair matted, and his face pale with exhaustion. He had a cardboard sign next to him that simply said, "Hungry." I remember stopping in my tracks. People walked past him like he didn't exist, umbrellas shielding them from the rain, eyes looking anywhere but at him. Something inside me made me pause. Maybe it was because I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to feel like nobody cared if you were surviving or not. I approached him slowly, unsure if I was making the right decision. He lifted his head, and I saw the tiredness in his eyes. They were a deep brown, almost too heavy for his face, but they carried something that stopped me from walking away. "Are you all right?" I asked softly, my voice almost drowned by the sound of rain hitting the pavement. He looked at me, surprised, as if no one had spoken to him in days. His lips trembled slightly before he managed to whisper, "I am just hungry." That simple sentence hit me hard. I didn't have much, but I couldn't walk away. I thought of the bag of bread I was carrying from the bakery, leftovers that my boss had let me take home. I knelt down and held it out. "Here, take this. It is not much, but it is fresh." His hand shook as he reached for the bag, and for a moment, I noticed how thin his fingers were. He opened the bag, inhaled the smell, and for the first time, a small flicker of life crossed his face. "Thank you," he murmured, and his voice cracked. I sat beside him, rain soaking my uniform. I didn't even care. "What is your name?" I asked. "Daniel," he said after swallowing a piece of bread. "What is yours?" "Maya." We sat there in silence for a moment. I should have gotten up and gone home. I was tired, I was wet, and I had bills to worry about. But something about Daniel made me stay. It was as though life was giving me a test, asking if I would choose compassion, even when I had little to give. "Do you have anywhere to stay tonight?" I asked. He shook his head. I sighed, staring at the puddles forming on the street. I didn't know what came over me, but I found myself saying, "There is an old couch in my apartment. It is not much, but at least it is dry." His eyes widened as if he didn't believe what he heard. "Are you serious?" "Yes, but only for tonight." He smiled faintly, a broken kind of smile, and whispered, "I will never forget this." That night, I brought him home, and that night, without knowing it, I began a story that would change both of our lives forever. When we stepped into my apartment, I felt a strange mix of nervousness and relief. The place was small, barely 2 rooms, with faded wallpaper and a couch that had seen better days. Daniel stood at the doorway, hesitant, his wet shoes dripping onto the old rug. "You can sit," I said, motioning toward the couch. He nodded slowly, almost like he was afraid to move. I went to the kitchen corner. It was really just a tiny counter with a sink and a small stove, and poured him a glass of water. He took it carefully, like it was the most valuable thing he had held in weeks. "Thank you, Maya," he said quietly. "I don't know why you are doing this." I shrugged. trying to hide my own awkwardness. Maybe because I know what it feels like to struggle. He tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his tired eyes. You don't look like someone who has it easy either. I laughed dryly. That obvious, huh? A small smile curved his lips. I've learned to recognize it. People who are fighting their own battles. For a moment, silence stretched between us. The sound of rain outside filled the room, soft and steady. He leaned back against the couch, still clutching the bread like it was his lifeline. So, how long have you been out there? I asked, my voice gentle. He sighed, his gaze dropping to the floor. A little over a year. Lost my job, then my apartment. One thing led to another, and suddenly, the street was the only place left. I bit my lip, unsure of what to say. I wanted to ask more, but I could see the weight in his expression. Instead, I just nodded. You can stay here tonight, tomorrow. We'll figure something out. Daniel looked at me, his eyes glassy, like he was holding back emotions. I don't want to be a burden. You won't be. The truth was, I didn't know if I could even take care of myself properly, let alone someone else. My paycheck barely stretched to the end of the month. But something about leaving him out there, in the rain, felt unbearable. Later that night, I gave him an old blanket. I lay on my small bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of him shifting on the couch. For some reason, knowing someone else was in the room made me feel less alone. The next morning, when I woke up, he was sitting at the small table, carefully folding the blanket. He had tidied the dishes from last night, even cleaned the counter. You didn't have to do that, I said, rubbing my eyes. He smiled faintly. I wanted to give back somehow. As I tied my apron, preparing to leave for another long shift at the bakery, he asked softly, Do you need help with anything? I shook my head. Not at the bakery, but maybe when I get back. We can talk about what you want to do next. He nodded, his expression serious. And before I left, he said something that stayed with me. Maya, you saved me last night. I don't know how to repay you, but I will. One day. At the time, I didn't believe him. But those words planted a seed I didn't realize would grow into something so much bigger. The bakery smelled of sugar and coffee, but to me, it always carried the scent of exhaustion. My boss barked orders from behind the counter, and the clatter of trays filled the air. I worked quickly, but no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for him. Maya, faster! He snapped as I packed pastries into boxes. Customers don't wait forever. I bit my tongue and kept moving. Complaining wasn't an option. I needed the job. But deep down, I wondered how long I could keep living this way. By the time my shift ended, my back ached and my hands were sticky with frosting. I trudged home, expecting to see Daniel still curled up on the couch. Instead, I found him sweeping the floor with the small broom I barely used. You don't have to do that, I said, surprised. He looked up with a half smile. I wanted to make myself useful, and it keeps me from thinking too much. I set my bag down, exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. He noticed the slump in my posture and asked, Rough day? Every day is rough, I muttered, collapsing onto a chair. He paused, then sat across from me. You deserve better. I laughed bitterly. Better doesn't pay the rent. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. What made you work there? It was the only place hiring. I didn't have many choices. He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I wanted to admit. Then he said something that caught me off guard. You helped me, Maya. Let me help you too. I frowned. How could he possibly help me when he had nothing himself? But then he started small. The next morning, when I dragged myself out of bed, he had already boiled water and set out instant coffee for me. When I got home at night, the apartment was tidier than it had ever been. He even found some scraps of wood by the dumpster and fixed the broken leg of my table. One evening, as I walked in, he handed me a piece of paper. I stared at it in surprise. It was a simple sketch of the bakery layout. What's this? I asked. He shrugged. Just ideas. If the counter were rearranged, maybe you wouldn't have to run back and forth so much. I blinked. You thought about my job that much? You come home looking like the world is crushing you. Maya, I can't just sit here and do nothing. Something in my chest tightened. No one had cared about my struggles in a long time. That night, while we ate the last of the bread together, I finally asked him about his past. What did you do before all this? Before the street? His expression darkened for a moment, but then he answered, I used to work in construction. I was good with my hands, always fixing things. But the company shut down. I couldn't keep up with rent. And one thing led to another. I stared at him, realizing he wasn't just a lost man. He was someone who had once built, created, and worked hard. You'll find your way again, I said quietly. He looked at me, almost disbelieving, before replying, I hope so. And maybe I'll be able to give back what you gave me. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of something I couldn't have imagined. A week later, life at the bakery became unbearable. My boss yelled louder, the customers complained more, and my paycheck seemed smaller each time I looked at it. I came home one evening with blistered hands and tears threatening to spill. Daniel was waiting. He noticed immediately. Maya, what happened? I dropped my apron on the chair and buried my face in my hands. I can't do this anymore. He treats me like I'm worthless. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady. You are not worthless. Don't let anyone make you believe that. I laughed bitterly. Easy for you to say. No, he said firmly. Not easy. I know what it feels like to lose everything. But you're stronger than you think. His words hit me in a place I didn't want to admit existed. Nobody had said something like that to me in years. The next morning, when I dragged myself out of bed, I found breakfast on the table. Nothing fancy, just bread warmed on the pan and coffee. But the gesture nearly broke me. I don't deserve this, I muttered. Daniel looked at me with a faint smile. Everyone deserves kindness, Maya. Even you. As days passed, he started doing more. He offered to walk me to work in the mornings, insisting the streets were safer that way. He waited outside when my shifts ended, carrying my bag when I was too tired to lift it. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to feel like I owed him. But slowly, I began to realize he wasn't taking from me. He was giving back in, the only ways he could. One evening, I found him sitting at the table with a stack of old newspapers he had picked up. He was circling job ads. You're looking for work, I asked. He nodded. I can't stay here forever. You gave me a chance, Maya. I need to take it. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile. That's good. That's really good. He leaned back, studying me carefully. Maya, can I ask you something? What? Why did you help me that night? You didn't even know me. I hesitated. Because I know what it's like to feel invisible. To feel like no one would notice if you disappeared. His expression softened. Then maybe we're not so different. The words lingered in the air, and for the first time, I felt a quiet connection between us. Two broken people, holding on to each other in a world that often looked away. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard him shifting on the couch. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel completely alone. A few weeks later, Daniel came home with a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen before. He placed a folded piece of paper on the table, and when I picked it up, I realized it was a temporary work contract. Construction assistant, I read aloud. He nodded, almost shyly. It's nothing big, just a short-term project. But it's a start. I couldn't stop the smile spreading across my face. Daniel, that's amazing. He rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. I wouldn't have even tried if it wasn't for you. The truth was, I had done so little compared to what he was doing for himself. But I didn't say that. Instead, I made us both instant noodles, and we celebrated like it was a feast. From that day on, Daniel started leaving early in the morning, just like me. He came home tired, but there was a different kind of exhaustion in him, one that came with pride. He fixed things around the apartment too. The leaking faucet, the squeaky door, even the broken chair leg, I had learned to balance carefully. Meanwhile, my own life at the bakery was spiraling. My boss grew harsher by the day. One morning, he berated me in front of a line of customers because I dropped a tray of croissants. My cheeks burned with shame as people stared. That evening, when I stumbled into the apartment, Daniel was there, setting his tools down. He looked at me and immediately noticed my red eyes. Maya, what happened? I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. It's just work. No, he pressed. Tell me. I sat heavily on the chair. My boss. He treats me like garbage. I can't breathe there anymore. Daniel's jaw tightened. You don't deserve that. You deserve a job where people respect you. I laughed bitterly. Jobs like that don't just fall into my lap. Then we'll make one fall, he said firmly. I blinked at him. What are you talking about? He leaned forward, eyes serious. You bake every day. I've seen what you can do with bread and pastries. What if you didn't have to work for someone else? What if one day you had your own place? The words hit me like a wave. My own place. That dream felt too big for someone like me. But when he said it, it didn't sound impossible. Daniel must have seen the doubt on my face, because he reached across the table, his rough hand brushing mine lightly. Maya, you gave me a second chance when I had nothing. Don't you think you deserve one too? I stared at him, speechless. No one had ever believed in me like that. That night, lying in bed, I thought about his words over and over, and for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that was more than just survival. The weeks that followed were a blur of exhaustion. Daniel worked long hours at the construction site, while I dragged myself to the bakery each morning with a knot in my stomach. The more I thought about his words, about having my own place, the more suffocated I felt behind that counter. One particularly bad day, my boss threw a bag of flour across the kitchen because I didn't move fast enough. The white powder burst into the air like smoke, settling all over my apron and hair. Customers stared. My hands shook, but I forced myself to keep working. When my shift finally ended, I walked home with tears blurring my vision. Daniel was waiting outside the building, dirt still on his clothes from the site. The moment he saw my face, his smile faded. Maya, what happened? I broke down right there on the sidewalk. I can't do it anymore, Daniel. I can't go back there. He didn't hesitate. He took my bag from my shoulders and guided me upstairs. Once inside, I collapsed onto the couch, my whole body trembling. Daniel crouched in front of me, his voice steady but firm. Maya, listen to me. You're not going back there. I looked at him through blurry eyes. What else can I do? Daniel, I need the money. He shook his head. There has to be another way. You're too good at what you do to waste yourself in that place. I wiped my eyes, frustrated. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, he admitted. But you've been surviving for so long. Isn't it time you started living? His words echoed in my head, and something inside me snapped. Not in anger, but in realization. He was right. I couldn't keep letting myself be crushed. That night, I sat at the table with a notebook and pen, staring at the blank page. Daniel sat across from me, patient, watching. What if, I whispered, I started selling my own pastries on the side, just small, maybe at the market. Daniel's eyes lit up. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I hesitated. But I don't have money for equipment. Or a stall. He leaned forward, determination in his gaze. Then we'll find a way. I'll work extra hours. I'll help build the stall if I have to. I stared at him, overwhelmed. Daniel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He interrupted softly. Because you believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Let me do the same for you. The room went quiet, only the sound of the city outside filling the silence. I realized then how much he had become a part of my life. Not just someone I helped once, but someone who stood beside me when the world pushed me down. And for the first time, the thought crossed my mind that maybe this bond was something more than just gratitude. The following weekend, Daniel showed up at the apartment with a stack of wooden boards balanced on his shoulder. I stared at him in shock. What is that? A stall, he said simply, setting the boards down with a grin. Or at least, the beginnings of one. I blinked. You're building me a stall. He wiped sweat from his forehead. We talked about the market, didn't we? You said you'd try selling your pastries. Well, you'll need something to sell them from. I covered my mouth with my hands, speechless. Daniel, you're working 12 hours a day. When do you even have time to do this? He shrugged as though it was nothing. Nights. Early mornings. Whenever I can. My chest tightened. A mix of guilt and gratitude swelling inside me. Why are you doing all this for me? Because you're worth it, Maya. His words hit me harder than I expected. I couldn't look at him for a moment, afraid he'd see the storm of emotions in my eyes. Over the next week, he built the stall piece by piece. At first, I tried to stop him, insisting he needed rest, but he wouldn't hear it. Instead, he taught me how to sand the wood, how to hold the nails steady. We laughed when I bent one of them crooked, and he gently took the hammer from my hand. Like this, he said, his fingers brushing against mine. I felt warmth spread through me, unfamiliar but comforting. When the stall was finally finished, I could hardly believe it. It was simple but sturdy, painted white with little shelves. Daniel added so I could display bread and pastries. It's beautiful, I whispered. He smiled. It's yours. The next Saturday, I set up at the market. My stomach was tied in knots as people walked by, glancing at my small display of bread and cookies. For the first hour, no one stopped, and I thought I had made a mistake. But then an older woman bought a loaf. Then a young man bought 2 cookies. Slowly, customers began to trickle in. By the end of the day, I had sold nearly everything. When I came home, Daniel was waiting at the door. His eyes searched mine, and when I held up the nearly empty basket, he grinned. "You did it," he said proudly. We celebrated that night with cheap takeout noodles, laughing like kids. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope that life could be different. As we sat on the couch, Daniel looked at me, his expression softer than usual. "Maya, do you realize how strong you are?" I shook my head, embarrassed. "I'm not strong. I just keep going." "That's strength," he said quietly. Our eyes met, and something unspoken passed between us. I felt my heart skip, but I looked away quickly, afraid of what it might mean. Still, a thought lingered as I fell asleep that night. Maybe this wasn't just about survival anymore. Maybe, slowly, it was becoming something more. The little stall at the market quickly became the center of my world. Each Saturday, I woke up before dawn, baked until the apartment smelled like sugar and butter, and carefully packed everything into baskets. Daniel always carried the heavy ones, insisting I shouldn't strain myself. At first, business was slow. Some days, I barely made enough to cover ingredients. But Daniel kept encouraging me. "People will come back. They just need to taste what you can do." And he was right. Soon, familiar faces started appearing. A mother who loved my cinnamon rolls, an office worker who picked up a loaf every week, children who came running for cookies. Little by little, my stall began to draw a small crowd. One evening, I returned home exhausted but happy, my basket almost empty. Daniel was repairing a crack in the wall when I walked in. I dropped the money I had earned onto the table with a grin. "Look," I said breathlessly, "we're getting somewhere." He glanced at the bills, then back at me, his smile wide. "I knew you could do it." We celebrated with tea and leftover bread, laughing over small things. But in the quiet moments, I started noticing how my heart reacted when he was near. The way his laugh filled the room. The way his eyes softened when he looked at me. One night, after we had finished cleaning up, I sat on the couch while he worked on sharpening one of his tools. The room was quiet except for the sound of metal scraping. "Daniel," I said softly. He looked up. "Yeah. Why are you still here with me, I mean? You could move on now. You're working again. You could find your own place." He paused, studying me. "Do you want me to leave?" My chest tightened. "No, I just don't understand why you stay." His voice was steady, almost too steady. "Because this feels like home, and I don't want to walk away from that." The silence stretched, heavy with meaning. I couldn't bring myself to say anything more, but my heart was racing. A few days later, as we walked home from the market together, a vendor from another stall joked Maya, "Your husband is very supportive, always carrying the baskets for you." I froze, heat rising to my cheeks. Daniel chuckled politely, but when I glanced at him, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that mirrored the confusion in my own heart. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the vendor's words echoing in my mind. Husband, supportive, home, and for the first time, I let myself wonder if maybe, just maybe, this bond between us was leading to something I had never dared to hope for. The weeks rolled into months, and my little stall grew busier with every market day. I started experimenting with new recipes, and Daniel became my unofficial taste tester. He would sit at the table, eyes closed, savoring every bite as if it was the best thing he had ever eaten. "This is incredible," he'd say, no matter what I gave him, even if it was slightly burnt. I laughed one night, swatting his arm lightly. "You're biased." "Maybe," he admitted, grinning. "But I'd rather be biased toward you." The words made my chest flutter, though I tried to hide it by focusing on the dough I was kneading. One chilly evening, after the market closed, Daniel and I carried the baskets home together. The streets were quiet, lit only by the yellow glow of lamps. Halfway back, I stumbled on the uneven sidewalk, and Daniel caught me by the arm before I could fall. "Careful," he said softly, his hand lingering on mine. I looked up, and for a moment, our eyes locked. The air between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. My heart pounded, and I quickly pulled my hand back, mumbling thanks. Back at the apartment, the silence stretched between us. He sat on the couch, running his fingers along the handle of his tool bag, while I busied myself with folding blankets just to avoid his gaze. Finally he spoke. "Maya." I froze, then slowly looked up. "Yeah, do you ever think about the future?" The question caught me off guard. The future was something I had avoided thinking about for years. Surviving day to day had been all I knew. Sometimes I admitted carefully. Why? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, because for the first time in a long time, I can actually see one. And when I picture it, you're there. My breath caught. The room suddenly felt too small, too intimate. "Daniel," I whispered, not trusting my voice. He shook his head quickly, as if regretting saying it. "Forget it. I didn't mean to." But I stopped him. "No, don't take it back." Our eyes met again, and this time I didn't look away. For a few long seconds, it felt like the entire world outside ceased to exist. Then, before either of us could say anything more, the sound of a car horn outside shattered the moment. Daniel leaned back, breaking the tension, and I busied myself with cleaning up the table. But as I lay in bed that night, his words repeated in my mind over and over. When I picture the future, you're there. And for the first time, I allowed myself to admit the truth. I wanted to be in his future too. 4 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. The little stall at the market grew into a small bakery of my own. The walls were painted a warm cream, the shelves filled with bread and pastries that customers lined up for every morning. Above the door hung a simple sign that read, "Maya's Bakes." Daniel had been there through it all. He worked construction during the day, but every evening he was by my side, building shelves for the shop, fixing broken ovens, or just keeping me company when exhaustion threatened to drag me down. We became a team, partners in every sense except one. Yet, despite everything, he never crossed the invisible line between us. There were moments, fleeting glances, touches that lingered too long, when I thought he might. But he always pulled back, and though my heart ached, I told myself it was enough just to have him by my side. Then one crisp autumn morning, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I had just finished setting dough to rise, flour dusting my apron. Wiping my hands, I opened the door and froze. Daniel stood there, dressed neatly for once, his shirt tucked in, his hair combed back. But what made my breath catch was the small velvet box in his hand. "Maya," he said, his voice steady but his eyes nervous. "Do you remember the night you found me on the street?" My throat tightened. "Of course I do. You gave me food. You gave me shelter. But more than that, you gave me hope when I had none. You believed in me before I could believe in myself. And everything I've built since then, every step forward, I owe to you." Tears stung my eyes as I tried to speak, but no words came. He took a breath, his hand trembling slightly as he opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, nothing extravagant, but shining with sincerity. I promised myself that one day I would repay you. But I realized along the way that it's not about debt. It's about love. "Maya, you are my home. Will you marry me?" For a moment, the world stopped. All the struggles, the sleepless nights, the years of survival, every pain had led to this moment. My hands shook as I pressed them to my mouth, tears streaming freely. "Yes," I whispered, then louder. "Yes." Daniel's face broke into the widest smile I had ever seen. He slipped the ring onto my finger with hands that had once trembled with hunger, but now held steady with purpose. I threw my arms around him, and for the first time, I felt what it meant to truly belong. That night, as we sat together in the bakery, with the oven still, warm and the smell of bread in the air, I realized something. 4 years ago, I thought I was saving a stranger. But the truth was, he saved me just as much. And now, we would face the future not as two broken people surviving, but as two hearts, finally whole, building a life together.